Daf Yomi, Tractate Zevachim, page 59, Daf Nun Test, starting from the bottom of 58b, very bottom line. I'll just read the English just to get over to the next page. Rav Sherebia said, in accordance with whose opinion is this Mishnah in Talmud, which holds that the entire altar was located in the northern part of the temple courtyard. It is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yossi Haglili, as is taught in a Braita. Rabbi Yossi Haglili says, since it is stated, and you shall set the basin between the tent of meeting and the altar, Exodus 40, verse 7, and in another verse it says, and now we're turning to the top of 59a, Nun Tes of an Aleph, the words Mizbeach Ha'olah B'Gomer. Mizbeach Ha'olah B'Gomer, Mizbeach B'Pesach Ha'olah Moed, V'no Makir B'Pesach Ha'olah Moed, Heichan, Hayin Ha'isnoi B'no Ulam Mizbeach B'Shoch Kima K'lap Yadon. The altar of the burnt offering he set at the entrance to the tabernacle of the tent of meeting, Exodus 40:29, indicating that no object was allowed to be located between the altar and the tent of meeting. It was parallel, and the temple was the sanctuary. Rabbi Yossi Haglili derives from the verses that only the altar stood at the entrance to the tent of meeting, but the basin did not stand at the entrance to the tent of meeting. Where would they place the basin? It was placed between the entrance hall and the altar, extended slightly toward the south. Therefore, although the basin was closer to the sanctuary than the altar was, it did not actually stand between the altar and the sanctuary. Micah Savar, the Gemara seeks to clarify, what does Rabbi Yossi Haglili hold? Micah Savar, what does he hold? If he holds that the entire altar stands in the south section of the temple courtyard, let him stand the basin anywhere from where the wall of the sanctuary begins and southward, so that it is not opposite the entrance to the sanctuary, but is between the entrance hall and the altar. This would allow for the optimal fulfillment of both verses, Exodus 40:29 and Leviticus 4:7, as the basin would be located between the altar and the sanctuary, without interposing between the altar and the entrance to the sanctuary. The Gemara continues, and even if he holds that the level of sanctity of the sanctuary and the entrance hall is the same, in which case the basin could not be located opposite the entrance to the entrance hall, as this too would be considered a violation of the second verse. Let him stand the basin anywhere from where the wall of the entrance hall begins and southward, so that it is not opposite to the entrance hall, but is in between the entrance hall and the altar. From the fact that Rabbi Yossi Haglili did not say that, it is clear he held that the altar was not located in the southern section of the temple courtyard. Alternatively, if Rabbi Yossi Haglili holds that half of the altar was located in the north section of the temple courtyard, and half of it was located in the south, let him stand the basin anywhere from where the wall of the sanctuary begins and southward, so that it is not opposite the entrance to the sanctuary, but between the entrance hall and the altar. Since the entrance to the sanctuary was 5 cubits wide and stood in the middle of the courtyard, and the altar was 32 cubits long, there would have been 11 cubits to both the north and the south of the entrance to the sanctuary where the basin could be placed in order to be located between the altar and the sanctuary without interposing between the altar and the entrance to the sanctuary. נוהג בגזול הנדוי מלול המזבח, אלא לאו משום דגסבון. And even if Rabbi Yossi really holds that the level of sanctity of the entrance hall and that of the sanctuary is the same, in which case the basin could not be located opposite the entrance to the entrance hall, because this too would be considered a violation of the second verse. Let him stand the basin anywhere from where the wall of the entrance hall begins and southward, so that it is not opposite the entrance hall, but in between the entrance hall and the altar. Why does Rabbi Yossi really require that the basin be placed south of the altar? The Gemara concludes, rather, is it not due to the fact that Rabbi Yossi really holds that the entire altar stood in the north section of the temple courtyard? And the Gemara asks, even if this be the case, why does Rabbi Yossi really require that the basin be located to the south of the altar, so that it is not actually in between the altar and the sanctuary? Even if you stand it anywhere from where the wall of the sanctuary begins and northward, it would not interpose between the altar and the entrance to the sanctuary, but it would actually be located in between the entrance hall and the altar. And even if Rabbi Yossi really holds that the sanctity of the entrance hall is equal to that of the sanctuary, and that the basin cannot interpose between the altar and the entrance hall, stand the basin anywhere from where the wall of the entrance hall begins and northward, so that it is not opposite the entrance to the entrance hall, but is located in between the entrance hall and the altar. The Gemara answers, that suggestion is technically not feasible, as the verse states, and he shall slaughter it on the side of the altar northward, Tzafona, Leviticus 1:11. This verse indicates that the north section of the temple courtyard must be vacant of all vessels, including the basin. This concludes the Gemara's explanation of Sharavia's assertion that the Mishnah in Tamid, which holds that the altar is located in the northern part of the temple courtyard, is in accordance with opinion of Rabbi Yossi Aglili. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, Netanya, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer, Zefona she'itzafon panui miklum, ve'afilu min hamizbeach. The Gemara asks, who is the Tana who disagrees with Rabbi Yossi Aglili? Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. That'd be a good. I once saw a Sofer that did the gematrias of all the Tanaim's names. 764, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Okay. Has a numerical value of 764. It's good to know. Okay. The Tanya, alright, who is the Tana who disagrees with Yosef Aglili? The Gemara answers, it is Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, as the Tana writes that Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says, the verse states, northward before the Lord, Leviticus 1:11. This indicates that the north section of the temple courtyard must be vacant of everything, and even of the altar. Therefore, he maintains that the entire altar stood in the southern section of the temple courtyard. Pretty big daf. Okay. Amara mizbeach shenivgam כל הקדוש מפני שקדושים פסולים מקראי הוא בידינו ושכחנוהו כי סוד רב השכחי רבי שמעון בן ברבי דקרון בשום רבי שמעאל ברבי יוסי מינן מזבח שנפגם שכל הקדוש מפני שכתוב שם פסולים. Rav says in the case of an altar that was damaged, all sacrificial animals that were slaughtered there are disqualified. Rav continues, we have a verse as the source for this halakha, but we have forgotten which one it is. When Rav Kahana, Rav's disciple, ascended from Babylonia to Eretz Yisrael, he found Rabbi Shimon, the son of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, saying, in the name of Rabbi Shmuel, son of Rabbi Yossi, from where is it derived that in the case of an altar that was damaged, that all sacrificial animals that were slaughtered there are disqualified? Shneimar v'zevachta alav et olatecha et shlemecha v'chi alav et tazaviyach ela kishu shalem v'lo kishu chaser Amar hainu krad yishtamit le'kelerav is derived from a verse as stated in the verse with regard to the altar. An altar of earth you shall make for me, and you shall slaughter upon it your burnt offerings and your peace offerings. Exodus 20:21. Is it true that you slaughter sacrificial animals on the altar itself? They are slaughtered on the ground near the altar. No, rather the verse indicates that one is able to slaughter the sacrificial animals on account of the altar, meaning when the altar is complete, but not when it is lacking, meaning damaged. Rav Kahana said this is the verse that alluded Rav. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, b'may pligi. Rav Sava b'lechaim nidchim, Rabbi Yochanan Sava b'lechaim nidchim. Rabbi Yochanan says both this and that one are disqualified, meaning all animals that are designated offerings when the altar was in a damaged state are disqualified, even if they were not slaughtered. The Gemara asks, with regard to what issue do Rav and Rabbi Yochanan disagree? The Gemara answers, Rav holds that living animals are not permanently deferred, and Rabbi Yochanan holds that living animals are permanently deferred. If the altar is damaged, and it is therefore impossible to sacrifice offerings, Rav holds that only offerings that were already slaughtered become permanently deferred, whereas Rabbi Yochanan holds that even those that were not yet slaughtered become permanently deferred. The Gemara raises an objection to Rav's opinion, based on a brayta. In the case of all sacrificial animals that were consecrated before the altar was built, and then the altar was subsequently built, the animals are disqualified. The Gemara assumes that this brayta is referring to animals that were consecrated before the building of the altar in the second temple. The Gemara responds, in a case where the animals were consecrated before the altar was built, the animals were considered initially deferred, meaning deferred from the time they were initially consecrated. In this case, all agree they are not permanently deferred and they can be sacrificed when the altar is built. Rather, explain the brayta as follows. If the animals were consecrated before the altar was destroyed in the first temple, and then the altar was destroyed and rebuilt, the animals are still disqualified. The Gemara questions its reading. Can the brayta be referring to a case where the altar was destroyed in the first temple? Didn't the animals become too old for sacrifice by the time the altar was constructed in the second temple? The Gemara amends the brayta yet again. Rather, the brayta is referring to a case where one consecrated the animals before the altar was damaged, and subsequently the altar was damaged. The halacha is that the animals are disqualified. It seems in this brayta that even sacrificial animals that were not yet slaughtered when the altar became damaged are nevertheless permanently disqualified. In contrast to the opinion of Rav, the Gemara rejects this proof. But did you not already have to amend the text of the brayta, amend it differently and say that the cases where the animals were slaughtered before the altar became damaged accordingly? There is no proof in this brayta with regard to the deferral of living animals. Rav said that sacrificial animals that were slaughtered in the temple courtyard when the altar was in a damaged state are disqualified. We're asked, but doesn't Rav Gidel say that Rav says, in a case where the golden altar became uprooted from its location in the sanctuary, one may burn the incense in its place? Apparently, it is not essential to have the altar in order to sacrifice offerings. The Gemara answers, it is like that which Rava says in 68. Although Rabbi Yehuda maintains that the entire temple courtyard is fit for burning the sacrificial portions of offerings, Rabbi Yehuda would concede with regard to the presenting of the blood that must be performed specifically on the altar. Here too, the Gemara says Rav concedes with regard to the blood that an altar is required. Consequently, if consecrated offerings were slaughtered when the altar was in a damaged state, since the blood may not be presented, the offering is disqualified. My Rabbi Yehuda, the Tanya Biyomahu, Kidesh Amelech Toch Echatzer, he was back as Moshe, Chatzim Hechel, Devar Mekich Sava, Devar Yehuda. Oh, Ki Mizbeach as Moshe, Chatzim Hechel, Devar Mekich Sava, Devar Yehuda. Having briefly mentioned Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, the Gemara asks, what is the context of the statement from Yehuda? The Gemara answers, as there's Tana Brakta. The verse states with regard to the inauguration of the temple in the time of King Solomon, on that day the king sanctified the middle of the court that was before the house of the Lord, as there he offered the burnt offering and the meal offering and the fat and the peace offerings, because the copper altar that was before the Lord was too small to receive the burnt offering and the meal offering and the fat of the peace offerings. 1 Kings 8:64. The matters in the verse are to be understood as they are written, meaning that the altar in the temple was too small to receive all of the offerings that Solomon sacrificed, and Solomon therefore sanctified the temple courtyard so that it too could function as an altar. This is the statement of Rabbi Yehuda. Amar lo Rabbi Yossi says, turning on to 59b now, Elo kfar nemar, Ela oros ya'ale shlamo al mizbeach hahu. ואילו בבית עולמים הוא אומר, ויזבח שלמה את זבח השלמים, אשר זבח לשם, ועקר 22,000. Now we're on the top of 59b, but isn't it already stated with regard to the altar that Moses built, 1,000 burnt offerings did Solomon offer upon that altar? 1 Kings chapter 3 verse 4. While with regard to the eternal house, meaning the temple, it states, and Solomon offered for the sacrifice of peace offerings, which he offered to the Lord, 22,000 cattle and 120,000 sheep. 1 Kings 8:63.